Okay, let's get going here. As usual, we always have a busy agenda on these master classes. Let me just kick off doing two things. Just put this master class into context, and we're moving onward with our flow of classes here. And then I'll naturally introduce our faculty member of today. But we are at our fifth masterclass, and as you might remember, kicking off in Nice, we tried to frame a masterclass having three focus. It's about direction, alignment, and commitment. And we've moved to the third theme here of our masterclasses. So we talked quite a bit about where to focus, as you might recall, with the early masterclasses, looking at customers' needs, looking at trends in market, even looking at potential for disruption. So a lot of things going on on the industry level, and a lot about where should we focus as an organization. Then the last two masterclasses has really been on the alignment level, if you like. We talked about business strategy, what choices to make and what not to do across the value chain. And the last session we had was really about digitalization. How do you start automating across the value chain for efficiency, but maybe also for value creation. So we talked a lot about where to focus, what to do, and now it's how to make it happen. And as our faculty member often talks to me about, sometimes it's even tougher to figure out how to make it happen, how to change behavior, than to figure out what to do. So that's really what we're going to start talking about today. And with us, we have our faculty member, our leading faculty member on organizational behavior here at AVT Business School. She's also a permanent faculty member at University College of London. Our faculty member has been at London Business School. She's also been at Judge School at Cambridge, where she also had her doctorate from. Raina Brands is our faculty member, and she's really a leading scholar in what she do, both on network theory and also on diversity. Maybe we'll talk a little about that today, even next to change. And she's been published in many of the leading journals in her field, but also in New York Times and Financial Times. So with those few remarks, and without any further ado, I'm very pleased to give the floor to you, Raina, please.
Thank you, Casper, and hello to all of you. Excuse me. I should have cleared my throat earlier. Hello to everyone. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to you all about a topic that I have been researching, consulting, and teaching about for almost a decade now, and that is leading change. So let me share my slides with you. Okay, so I always like to start my sessions not by talking to you or talking at you, but rather hearing from you. So what I'm really curious to hear about is the sort of organizational change problems you're grappling with right now. So I'm going to give you just a minute to think about that, and then I'll ask some of you to share the change problems that you are grappling with right now in your day-to-day organizational life. So just take a minute to think about that, and when you've thought of your change problem, perhaps you can raise your hand and share with the group. Okay, so you've all had a minute or so to think about that. So who is willing to share the change problems they're thinking about right now with everyone here? I see, Louis, you've put a smiley face in the chat. What change problems are you? Oh, I see, you're responding. So I see there's the merge with LP. So who wants to tell me about that? Louis.
Raina, I think you might be.
So Gulam? So no, we can't hear you, Louis.
What about now?
Perfect, yes.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I published a smiley because when you asked the question, it came kind to apparently Guillaume, also to myself, but I guess about a lot of colleagues. So yeah, we're in the process of preparing a merger with LeasePlan, which is quite an organizational topic. Maybe more specific, we're setting up an office, a central office that needs to manage the integration, but also in each country we set up this kind of office. And it's all about finding the balance between what is done centrally, what is done locally, what needs to be protected in the run organization or in the project organization. So yeah, that's clearly
Absolutely.
a challenge.
Yeah, so that's a huge organizational change, obviously a merger. So if you 6 months down the line, you walked into your newly merged organization, how would you know if it was successful? What would you be able to see? What would give you the signal that it was successful?
So you mean after the merger has happened?
How will you know the merge has been successful?
My way of measuring it would be more people related and a bit emotional. Do people feel part of the same organization? Look towards the same direction? Obviously, there could be many other criteria.
Yeah, okay, so you're talking about feelings and looking to the same direction. So they're quite hard to see, but I see in the chat here, Hadrian has said, when people from LP stop saying they're from LP. So Hadrian, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. What I mean by that is, I guess if you're integrating people from a different company and they have had a history with this company, I guess for me the success of the integration or the merger, as we call it, would be for these people not to, I would say, mention the former name of the company anymore, and maybe the name of the new company. So different probably corporate culture, but yeah.
Yeah, so I like that because that's very concrete. That's kind of the concrete, what you could see, what you very concretely, which is what Louis was sort of saying. Well, they start thinking about themselves as this new part of this organization, and Hadrian's pointing to the behavior, which is people start referring to themselves as part of this new organization. They don't say we're from LP anymore. So Alexander, you said integration of fleet pool in the ALG group world. So tell me more about that change. Alexander, are you still there? I can see that you're toggling on and off. We seem to be having a few issues with our audio, so maybe we can hear from Alexander a little bit later. I can see him toggling on and off, and I think he's popped off to log back on. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the merger, and we'll certainly be talking more about the merger later in today's session. Are there any other change problems that you're thinking about right now, apart from the merger? Okay, so Suvajit, you're talking about this kind of cultural integration. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so ALD is quite a multicultural organization. We have people from various different countries at the EXCO level, and we've seen a huge amount of change acceptance which has happened in the organization in the last couple of years, or probably about a decade. LeasePlan has been Dutch all over, that's what we know, and probably they have the same culture everywhere, and they've been the leaders. You're taking over a leader, and they have that ego that we were the leaders and we are the people who know everything about leasing, and you guys are following us. Getting them to accept our culture, or bringing in a joint culture, would probably be a big challenge.
And how if these leaders had accepted the culture, how would you know? If you walked into tomorrow and everyone had accepted it, how would you be able to see that? What could you observe that would let you know that that was successful?
In the long run, I would say, in simple terms, in terms of business, if 1 + 1 becomes 3, that would be one of the things which would actually prove that people are coming together and actually working towards the same goal, and we are achieving our business objectives. That would be one of the things. But as earlier also said by one of our colleagues, is that the day they start thinking that we are a part of a new organization, and we used to do this in lease plan, this is how lease plan is to function, and if that is something we stop hearing, that's how we will probably make out that yes, what kind of into a new organization.
Right, and I think you said something else really important there too, because you're talking about performance, but it's about how you get those performance outcomes. So do you see people working quite collaboratively together, putting the organization first, versus still being stuck in this kind of us versus them mentality? And I think that's an important part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for those of you who shared the sort of change problems that are on your mind. And you'll notice that I was pushing everyone to really think about, well, how would you know if it was successful? What would you be able to observe? And the point I'm trying to make there is a really important one when we're thinking about organizational change. And that is that ultimately, all organizational change means that people have to start behaving differently. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about cultural change, it doesn't matter if you're talking about a merger and an acquisition, and it doesn't matter if you're talking about something quite small scale compared to those things. All of those things mean that people have to start behaving differently in your organization. So when you're thinking about leading change, driving change, and inspiring change, you yourself should be quite specific about what behaviors you want to see. It's pretty easy to kind of lose the thread of change management plans if you're not specific about what exactly is the behavior that people need to start exhibiting. So that's one of the first kind of things that I want to give you to take away and think about. So when you're thinking in the realm of this merger and acquisition, ultimately you have to be able to say to yourself, what is the behavior change I need? But of course, the other implication of that is that to be an effective change leader, you really need to ground your practice in psychological models of behavior change. And that's something that I will be spending quite a lot of time with, particularly in the first half of our session, is understanding the psychology of why people behave the way they do, why do they resist change even when it's in their best interests, and how we can use that understanding to really inspire and motivate people to change their behavior. So of course, I said I've been teaching change for a decade, and this is a perennial topic of interest because what we know is that human beings can have a hard time with change. If you've ever started a New Year's resolution and dropped it a few weeks later, you know this. And I particularly like this fact that illustrates how hard human beings can find change. And that is that within 2 years of a coronary artery bypass, 90% of people have not changed their lifestyles. So that's quite stark because that is life or death. Even in a life or death situation, human beings struggle to find the motivation for change. But then there is this nice flip side to that, and that is that sometimes change is really easy. We change and we grow all the time. You are attending these masterclasses because you believe in your ability to change your practice as leaders and as managers. And you can think about that change process a little bit like learning to ride a bike or learning to drive a car. So when you first started learning to drive a car, you would have found that it took a lot of effort and a lot of your cognitive resources. You had to concentrate really hard on when to brake, when to turn the steering wheel. But over time, as you practice those skills, it becomes easy and it becomes effortless. And eventually you can do a whole bunch of things while you are driving the car or riding your bike. And that is the kind of model for how human beings change their behavior. It takes self-control to practice new behaviors, which over time become easier. Over time, it becomes easier to the point where we achieve mastery. And this practice of effortful self-control that we practice over time until we have that mastery, it's essential for organizational change because it's essential for building new habits and building new skills all of which are really important in organizational change efforts. So what I want to give you this afternoon is the kind of flavor of what is the psychology of behavior change and how we can think about taking this process, a process that we're all familiar with as human beings, and using it to design more effective change interventions and unpacking resistance to change. So why do we want to do this? Well, change management is essential. So here we have what can happen, what often happens, and what is the ideal situation when we're thinking about change management. So typically, this is what stakeholders think that is going to happen, that we go from the current state, we make this change, and we're going to experience all these gains, and this change is going to be great for our organization. But what actually happens, particularly if the change is not well managed, is that there is this huge period of disruption. And in this huge period of disruption, we have this adverse impact on performance. And it can seem like this strategic shift that we all thought was going to be fantastic was actually a really bad idea. So what effective change management can do is just lessen that pain. You can't get away from the adverse impact, particularly in a merger and acquisition situation. There's always a period of disruption where the gains of the merger aren't realized. But an effective change management strategy can make that adverse impact less painful and get you to the desired state more quickly. So what's on our agenda this afternoon? So first, I want to use this psychological model of behavior change to gain new understanding to why people resist change. Then I want to move to evidence-based solutions for inspiring change. And then in our final hour or so together, we'll think about managing change in the informal organization. So going from the individual more to the group level. So before we begin, are there any questions, comments, concerns? Good. Okay. So before you came to today's masterclass, I gave you a very short reading which describes the switch model of change. So the rider, the elephant, and the path. So does anyone, I've already heard that you like this reading, so I'm looking for a volunteer to kind of explain what you understand the rider, the elephant, and the path to mean. So can anyone explain the model from the reading?
Okay, maybe for me then to step up.
Fantastic.
My name is Jerome. I like this article a lot. I think there's been a lot of academic publications about the right half of the brain and the left half of the brain and the difference between emotion and ratio. And of course, I can always feel that my ratio wants something different than my emotion, especially when things go wrong. And the interesting metaphor here, I thought, was that the rider can steer the elephant as long as the elephant doesn't get too emotional, because the elephant will be quite a lot stronger than the rider. And the path, I think it was not so much the path that you want to go, but especially the environment and the context in which this is all happening. And I think the context can shape a lot about the emotion, especially, well, for myself, if I'm looking at the merger, if I'm really putting myself on to fixing myself on the desire to have a specific position in the new company, the path will be much more difficult for the elephant to follow. Whereas if I keep an open mind, which is of course difficult, then the emotion can stay away for much longer. And then I also read in the article that to restrain yourself is an energy which is consumed at some stage. So this probably is not the right way to work. So I need to consider how to keep an open mind on the developments, while at the same time being true to myself and not letting emotions in. But that's from myself. So I can also use that reflection on others, of course. So that's why I thought it was a beautiful article, to be honest.
Yeah, so I think it sounds like you've really understood the model well. So the rider is the kind of rational part of our brain. The elephant is emotions and intuition. And then the path is exactly what you said, is the situation that you find yourself in that can nudge you towards change. So this distinction between the rider and the elephant this is what we call the dual process model of human thinking and behavior. So it differentiates between things that are housed in our prefrontal cortex. So that's the writer. So this is rational thought, planned action, deliberative reasoning. So whenever you sit down and consciously think about a task and a goal and how you're going to get there, you're engaging with your writer. So that's all in the prefrontal cortex, and that's the part of our brain that developed most recently, and it houses all the things that sort of set us apart from other animals. So the writer is responsible for rational thought, deliberative reasoning. It gets us to answers accurately, but it's pretty slow. And the elephant, this is housed more in the back of the brain, and this is things like emotion and intuition. Our elephants can process a lot of information rapidly, but often at the expense of accuracy. Our elephants speak to us through kind of gut instinct. And so whenever you're feeling, you have sort of intuition or an initial reaction, that's usually your elephant talking to you. So this distinction between the writer and the elephant, as I said, it's called the dual process model of human behavior and thinking, and it has been applied to understand a whole bunch of reactions and behaviors across many different situations. So let me give you a few examples. Right, so looking at the cameras, I think you're all old enough for me to use this example, but just respond very quickly in the chat. So what did everyone stop doing after 9/11? In the year immediately after 9/11, what did everyone stop doing? Right, yeah, so everyone's got it flying, exactly. So why did everyone stop flying? You know, and particularly, is that a rational thing to do? Do you think it's rational for everybody to stop flying after 9/11? So you can raise your hand here, or if you want, or you can respond in the chat. So Frank, you've said no, why is that? Why don't you think it's rational?
It's not rational, because from a rational perspective, flying is still the safest way to transport yourself from A to B, and the chance that this would happen again is much more limited than you get run over by, let's say, by a car while trying to cross a pedestrian path or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So then why, I agree, yeah, totally irrational from a statistical point of view. So in terms of this rider-elephant metaphor, how do you make sense of this? Why did everyone stop flying?
Because suddenly it goes from, let's say, the rationality conflicts with the real context or the situation, that it suddenly happened, and then your, let's say, your intuition or your feeling comes in conflict. In this particular case, your feeling takes over, like, it actually can go wrong, and then the impact is, of course, massive, and that puts a completely different context in, I would say, the battle between the rationale or the emotion.
Exactly, yeah. So it's your rider's definitely not in charge there. It's your elephant.
Yeah.
And your elephant responds really strongly to vivid and emotional and experiential things. And so we all kept seeing the footage over and over again of these planes, this awful footage of the planes going into the Twin Towers. And your elephant says, no way, there is no way I'm getting in a plane. Even if your rider knows very clearly that it's completely irrational. As you've all said, no, it's exactly as Frank has described, you're much more likely to die in a car accident. And in fact, the road toll after 9/11 far surpassed the death toll of 9/11 itself because of the increased fatalities on the road. So decision-making, we're very much biased by our elephants. Our elephants are biased by vivid, salient, emotional information. And that's easier for us to remember, and it can make us make us ignore base rates. So decision-making biases.
Could you also argue that it has to do with, if it's, let's say, not visible, the problem does not exist, because there are many people killed in our car accidents every year, but you don't see it. While this suddenly becomes visible, and then it's like, oh, it's really there.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's exactly right. Our elephants are very much in charge of our decision-making around risk. And our elephants don't respond to statistics. Our elephant responds to visible, salient examples.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me give you another example from a different, not decision-making, but a different realm. So this is my dog. This is actually my dog. I just put him outside of the room. Probably when we finish, I'll take him for a walk. So imagine if I took him for a walk and he gets away from me and he very sadly gets hit by a car. Now, I've heard dog meat is delicious. Is it okay for me to eat my dog? So I think we have a poll for this question because I'm curious to see everyone's reactions. So Casper, can we put up the first poll?
Yes, launch poll here.
So should I eat my dog? I've given you if you want or definitely not. So when we're ready, you can share those results, Casper. Okay, so most people say definitely not. So why not? Why can't I eat my dog? Everyone seems to think I can't. So Hadrian says he's family. Tim says too hairy. So Hadrian, I'm actually interested, Vanessa, because you love him. So maybe Vanessa, I'm interested to hear about your feelings here. Why I can't eat my dog.
You can hear me? Yes, right. Okay. Cool. Yes, wait, can you, I mean, from a rational point of view, of course, you can eat your dog, but then as long as you consider him as being part of the family, you love him, you have some emotions. So I guess, I mean, it prevents you from doing that. It's like eating your child or your husband or.
But he's not my child or my husband, right? He's
no, right, but it's part of the
just
family.
another animal.
And then I think it's as well linked to the cultural aspect.
To the what, sorry?
To the cultural aspect. Maybe if you're a Chinese, maybe it seems a bit more natural to eat a dog. When you're French, I guess it's a bit weird.
Okay.
So,
see, I like what you just said. It's a bit weird because so everyone hold on to this. It's a bit weird because that is exactly the kind of reaction that I was hoping to garner. There's a psychologist called Jonathan Haidt, and he sets up all these moral problems just like this one. And the moral problems are set up such that whatever your usual objection is, it's taken care of. So in this case, I didn't kill my dog. The dog happened to die. You know, I eat other meat, so why wouldn't I eat this particular animal? And so what he was trying to show with these moral problems is that it's not our riders that are in charge. He's trying to show that our elephants, they're in charge of moral reasoning. So what most of you experienced was this kind of kick, a kick in the guts. Your elephant was like, whoa, that feels wrong. And then your rider starts to rationalize it. And so Vanessa was, exactly the reaction I was hoping for. She sort of went from, well, his family to his culture. So her rider's spinning, trying to make sense of this emotional reaction that she just had. And she ends with, it's just a bit weird, which is her elephant talking. You know, that's us translating our elephant. So, these examples of decision-making, of moral reasoning, these are just good illustrations for you to experience how our rider and our elephant interact all the time. So these are two systems that are always at play and always interacting with one another. And so this is a really good model for understanding why people behave the way they do across a range of different situations. And what I would like to do now is use that model to understand or better understand resistance to change. So why people resist change, even perhaps when they're in situations where resistance to change is pretty irrational. So I'm going to do this through the lens of a case. And the case is about some firefighters who died because they refused orders to drop their tools. So I know when we're sitting in front of our computer in this sort of format, it can be very, we're easily distracted. But after I give you this case, I'm going to break you into groups and we're going to have a discussion. So, at least for the next few minutes, I would just sort of sit back from your computer so you can really concentrate on the case itself so that you can really unpack it in detail later. So this particular case is about a group of firefighters called the Smoke Jumpers. So the Smoke Jumpers still exist. They are an organization in the US, and the role of the Smoke Jumpers is that they fight fires in really remote regions. So I'm going to just play some footage for you without any sound as I talk, just so you can get a sense of who the firefighters are and what they do. So this particular incident happened in 1949 in Montana. And it was in some very wild mountains. So even today, these mountains are very wild. So you can picture very dense forests that are punctuated by plains of grass and very rocky hills. So these mountains are very wild, they're very remote. You can't drive a truck in to fight the fires. So that's what the role of these Smoke Jumpers is that they parachute out of these little propeller planes and they parachute into the fire. And when they're on the ground, they fight the fire there. So on the particular day that this fire happened, it was hot. It was the hottest on record, and it was very dry. And so in these conditions, all it takes is a single lightning strike and really huge, intense fires can begin. And that's how the fire started on this particular day. So this group of Smoke Jumpers, they're an elite group, and they are elite, but perhaps not particularly professional, or they weren't at the time. So at the time, this was a casual job for most of the men. Most of the men were university students, and they just did this on the side to earn a little bit of money. So the role of the Smoke Jumpers is to fight what they call Class C fires. So these are small fires in firefighting terms. And a small fire in firefighting terms is anything less than 100 acres. So the Smoke Jumpers themselves, they called these 10 o'clockers, meaning that they were so small, they would have them out by 10 o'clock the next morning. So as I said, this was an elite, but not particularly professional group, pretty loose organization. They just kept a list of names, and whoever's names were at the top of the list when the fire was called in, they would be called up, they'd go up on the plane, they'd fight the fire, they come back, the names at the bottom of the list. So some fires needed 20 men, some fires needed 2 men. So the people you were jumping with changed every single time. So basically, you can see them getting ready for a jump now. Their routine was that they have these packs, and they pack up all their food, their provisions, and their tools in their packs, and then they parachute out of planes to fight these fires. And they did that by creating fire breaks. So fires need 3 things to burn. They need oxygen, they need a temperature above ignition point, and they need flammable material. And that's what the Smoke Jumpers did, is they started taking away flammable material. So basically, they would create these fire breaks. So that's a couple of meters wide. It's a trench, and they just remove all the flammable material from the area. So when the fire approaches, there's nothing for it to burn, and so the fire is contained. And they did that using their tools. So I've put their main tools up here so you can really get a sense of how this is done. So first, pairs of men would walk along the fire line, and they would use these 2-man swords to cut down all the trees in the fire line. And once they'd done that, they would then take this tool. So this tool in the top left-hand corner here, that's a Pulowski. So it's basically an axe with a hoe on the other end. And at the time, you couldn't buy these. So the Smoke Jumpers, they would turn up for their training, they'd bring their own axes, and as part of their training, they would attach the hoe onto the other end of the axe. And they would use these to go through the fire line, and they'd cut down any of the small shrubs. So once all the vegetation was cleared, they then used the hoe to turn the soil. So once then they've created this soil, this fire break, they then take the shovels and they start working back into the fire. And so they move towards the fire and they start burying any burning debris. So this is very physically demanding work, as you can imagine. They spend hours sawing and shoveling and digging. Now, this fire where the men lost their lives happened on this mountain, which is Man Gulch. So on the day of the fire, a park ranger named Jim, he spotted the fire. It was sort of burning around here. And he called it in, and the men, whose names were at the top of the list, so there were 15 men called in for this fire. They were called in and they were sent out to the fire with their foreman for the day, who was a man named Dodge. So then plane took off around noon, and by 3 p.m. they'd found the fire. But the conditions on the day were really bad. It was very windy. So it took them a while to figure out what they should do. So finally, the Dodge, their foreman, and the pilot decided that they should land at the top of the mountain, which is a fair way away from the fire. So they threw their tools out with parachutes attached, and they parachute out after their tools, and they land at the top of the mountain. But because it was so windy, their tools were spread over a huge area. It took them quite a while to collect everything. So by the time they were ready to start fighting the fire, it was actually 5 p.m. So one of the men who died had been given a watch for his birthday. So they knew what time the men had died because the hands of the watch had melted onto the face. And so they knew that the men had died at 5:56 p.m. So at 5 p.m., they really only had a very short time to live. Of course, they themselves didn't know this. At the time, they still thought that this was a 10 o'clocker. And 10 o'clockers are really easy to contain. They burn quite slowly. They're not difficult fires at all. So while the men had been getting ready, Dodge had gone down to the fire to see this park ranger, Jim, find him, figure out what he was going to do. But as soon as Jim and Dodge found each other, Dodge could see that actually the situation was quite dangerous. The forest was very dense and very dry. And in Dodge's mind, it looked like a tinderbox. So he said to Jim, let's get out of this death trap. And so they leave and they make their way back to the men. And once they found the men, Dodge told them about his plan. So his plan was actually, because he thought that the forest looked quite dry and dangerous, he thought the best thing to do would actually be to cross the mountain and come down the mountain and then start fighting the fire from its rear or its flank, just down here. And his plan was that if they did that, they would be able to stay above the line of the fire. So you can think about them walking down this ridge, and they'll be able to see if the fire suddenly changed directions. And Dodge thought if the fire suddenly changed directions, they'd be able to escape down to the river. So some of the men were not particularly happy with this plan of attack. They really actually wanted to fight the fire head on. But despite expressing this to Dodge, they ultimately followed his plan. And so they started walking down the mountain. So they set off around 5:20, but almost immediately things became quite confusing. It was very smoky, very loud. And the men got separated. So they had to pause, and Dodge had to spend a bunch of time bringing them all back together as a group. So by the time they set out again, it was probably around 5:30. So they've been walking down the mountain on this side, and suddenly there was this huge gust of wind, and it lifted all the smoke. And Dodge saw the fire jump the mountain. So this can happen if a fire is burning very hot and very slow, and all that air becomes heated to a temperature above ignition point. All it takes is a gust of wind to take that hot air to somewhere else, and new fires will begin just because there's a lot of flammable material and there's all that hot air in this new place. And so that's how the fire jumped from this side of the mountain to the side of the mountain that the men were walking down. So now Dodge knew three things. So the first thing he knew was that the fire had cut off their escape to the river. So his original plan was that they were going to come down and escape to the river if the fire blew up or changed directions, but now they couldn't do that. The second thing he knew was that this was actually no longer a 10 o'clocker. He knew that this was now a blow up. So a blow up is quite a rare event, but a very dangerous event. Blow ups are incredibly fast moving, basically walls of fire. You can think about it like a tsunami of fire. It can burn through a huge amount of material in just a matter of minutes. So the third thing Dodge knew was that their only hope for surviving this would be to get to the top of the mountain. So he gave the order that the men should turn and run. And everybody did, but it was difficult. Remember that it's the hottest day of the year, and they're running through waist-high grass. They had on their packs and they had their tools. So between them, they had 2 saws, 3 shovels, and 12 Pulaskis. And so they're running up this mountain with all of these things. So they've been running. Dodge looked back and he could see that the fire was gaining on them. It was chasing them up the mountain. And so this is when he gave that critical order that they all ignored. And that order was, drop your tools. As I said, almost all of the men ignored him. They kept running up the mountain on the hottest day of the year with their packs, 2 saws, 3 shovels, and 12 Pulaskis between them. So when Dodge looked back at the fire again, he thought that it would be on them in about a minute. And so at this point, he actually stopped running. He took out a box of matches, he lit a match, and he burnt out the area around him. He then took his handkerchief, he dipped it in his flask of water, and he gestured for the men to follow him, and then he covered his face with his wet handkerchief and lay face down in the area that he just burnt out around him and waited for the fire. A few of the men paused to see what he was doing, but none of them lay down with him. They kept running for the top of the mountain. The fire really did engulf them a few seconds later, and of all the men running for the top of the mountain, only these 2 men survived, Walter Rumsey and Robert Sally. So they'd actually been at the back of the fire line when Dodge first told them that they should start running. And they'd been holding one of those saws between them. So they quickly figured out that they couldn't run with the saw, so they dropped the saw spontaneously. And then that gave them the kind of intuition to take off their backpacks. And because they had none of this extra weight, they were able to catch up to the front of the line and just really keep running for the top. And they actually recall that they passed the park ranger, the one who'd been out since 10 a.m. They remembered that seeing him at some point just stop with his pack on, sit down, leaning against a tree, and just waited for the fire to come. They also recall seeing one of the men running with his shovel, and Walter caught up to him and tapped him on the shoulder, took the shovel from him, and then placed it next to a tree, and then kept running for the top of the mountain. So they survived. They got to the top of the mountain just in time. They found a crevice in the rocks, and the rocks protected them as the fire came over them. And because there's not much to burn at the tops of the mountain, they were able to contain the fire quite quickly. The only other person to survive was Dodge, their leader for the day. His shelter fire had protected him. The main blowout passed over him, and he was able to survive by breathing in just a little bit of oxygen that's always near the ground. So the fire that these men died in, the rest of the 13 men, was enormous. It burned through 3,000 acres in just a matter of minutes. So it turned out to be a very deadly blaze. So I think that this is obviously a very sad story, but I think this story is also quite powerful in helping us understand why people resist change, even in a situation where not only is it in their best interest to change, but actually it's a life or death situation. So what I would like to do now is just brainstorm as a group all the reasons why the smoke jumpers refused orders to drop their tools. And then I'm going to be breaking you into groups to do some analysis of this brainstorm that we'll do together. So let me, while you're thinking about that question, let me put up a whiteboard. Okay, so why do you, let me just get myself up here. Here's my chat. So why is it, do you think, I think there's a lot of reasons, but why is it that the men are refused orders to drop their tools? So you can either respond in the chat, or you can of course unmute yourself and share your thinking as well. Okay. So I'm seeing a few things here. Let's hear from okay, so Louis, you said, so let's, okay, so I'm just going to go in order here. So Anne Cecile, you've said habit. Tell me more about habit.
I think they were like in automatic mode because there was so much fear in them, and because they don't know better and they're just used to having this as part of their equipment, it was just something they kept out of habit. Right. They were not in a headspace where they could question what they know. Exactly, right? So we're used to carrying our tools, and in this kind of situation where we don't have the capacity to, who is controlling the whiteboard right now? Casper?
I am, sorry. I was thinking, why is there a whiteboard on my screen?
Okay.
Sorry for that. I'll stop writing.
Yeah, sorry, I thought we had a ghost in the computer. Okay. Right, so we were talking a little bit about habits. So when we're in these situations where we don't have the capacity to engage our writer, we're running on automatic pilot. And here the automatic pilot was, well, we hold on to our tools. We've been trained actually to hold on to our tools. So that's an excellent point. So Louis, or is it Louis or Lewis? I've been calling you Louis. Maybe that's wrong.
Both are fine.
Okay. So you've said panic, elephant in control. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think to obey the order requires a rational thinking of, I will lose some time now by dropping my tools, but I will gain it back by being faster after. But if you're totally in emotional mode or so totally catched by panic situation, it's probably harder to take this rational decision. That would be my guess.
Okay, good. So Christopher, you said they do not feel safe about that tool without their tools. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I guess it's related also to the habit, but basically they might have thought, that in case we are getting a even worse spot, we can actually dig ourselves out or do what we usually do, which is creating this these fire lines.
Right. So I think that's really important that they're not only they're trained to hold on to their tools because they're expensive, and they're also trained to hold on to their tools because actually the tools is what they use to fight the fires. So for them, tools are something that keeps them safe. So I think you're right. They don't feel safe without their tools because the tools help them fight fires, and they don't. Exactly as we just heard from Louis, we can't make this rational decision to understand that the tools are actually holding them back in this situation. Okay, so Pekka, can you tell me more? You said it's against what has been instructed in practice. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, I guess that the guys are there voluntarily and they should know what to do to get there. So I assume that they have practiced what to do to get there. So it's completely against it's irrational kind of decision to go against what you have practiced.
Yeah, that's right. So absolutely, they were certainly had a lot of practice in holding onto their tools. They've been trained to do that, and they actually changed the way they changed the smoke. They trained the smoke jumpers after this incident for that reason. What else do I have in the chat? Oh, so Timo, you've just put an interesting comment: resistance for failing. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think be all in mind regarding our responsibilities and duties. There's another thinking that, I mean, we're always focusing on the success. And for such a duty, for such a responsibility, leaving the tools and coming back without the tools is sometimes it's not it's a resistance. I mean, it's something we do not usually accept, and we usually do not leave our tools till the last minute. I think it may be one of the reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. So dropping their tools it symbolizes failure. I think also more generally what you're pointing to is dropping the tools means we're not going to fight this fire anymore, and that could be a failure in itself. So I see that Mauricio is making a similar point here. They had a mission to complete and they need the tools to do it. Maybe if they lose the tools, they can save themselves, but their duty was accomplished, the mission. So that's exactly what we just said. So that's right. There's a symbolic feeling to their actions that if they drop their tools, they're failing, they're dropping the mission. So Frank, you've made some interesting comments here about leadership. So tell me more about that.
Yeah, because as I understood it, it was a new group that never had worked with this leader. So they were completely, let's say, unknown with his, let's say, judgment call and leading the group. So if there's no trust, then irregardlessly if the leader makes a good or bad decision, there's no trust that the decision will actually save their lives.
Yeah, exactly right. So there's no trust in the leader. So, and he didn't communicate, right? So
yeah. No, so that's true, because that was the other part of the context that, you know, he started doing something but not explaining why he actually did it. And then if that what he does is different compared to what has been done before or trained, it even creates more confusion.
Exactly. Yes. So there's a lot to unpack here about Dodge. So first of all, he wasn't a leader. He was their manager. They'd never heard from this guy. They'd never encountered him before. So he hadn't built up that trust that you could draw on to get a really quick behavior change. Yep. And in the absence of trust, you have to communicate. And as you said, he never communicated. He never gave the why. And perhaps the situation didn't really help him. Yep. He didn't really have the time. But in the absence of that trust and the explanation, no, people aren't going to deviate from what they know and really follow Dodge's orders.
No. And I must say also that's what crosses my mind right now, since the group itself was also new. There was also no coherence or alignment between the group. If you end up in a situation like that, who does what within the group, apart from the leader itself?
Right, exactly. So that's a really important point, because when we are in situations with a new group and we don't know what to do, we look around to see what everybody else is doing. So if nobody else is dropping their tools and nobody else is going to lie down with Dodge, that's the kind of emergent norm that we'll follow. Yeah. So no settlements. Okay. So John, you said tools had high personal value. Tell me more about that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think the fact that they had to modify and
John, you're on mute again.
Yeah, sorry, it keeps going on mute automatically. So I think it just gives them a higher value in their minds, and it therefore would be hard for them to throw them away. A bit like a child with a favorite cuddly toy, you know, they hold on to it at all costs.
Yeah, and I think this high personal value is linked to the fact that these are also kind of symbolic of who they are and what they do. They made them themselves. They're these firefighters. These are the tools we use as part of our job, our identity. So what about it? So we've heard a lot about the kind of social context, the leadership context. Is there anything about the change context itself, the fire itself, that might have led to the firefighters resisting this change effort? So anything about the situation, the path that they find themselves in, the situation around them? We talked a little bit about panic. Is there anything else about being in this situation itself? Yeah, so the situation changed dramatically fast. So how do I pronounce your name? Majek? Yeah, so tell me more about that.
I think they were having a mission with one path defined, that we will go down the hill because the fire is moving from this side to this side, and suddenly the plan needed to be adjusted because the situation changed, and I think that was a surprise, so to say, for the group. So that's why I said situation changed dramatically fast, and they probably couldn't adapt as quick as they should.
Right, and yes, they couldn't adapt as quickly as they should, and that's very driven to by some of these issues that we've talked a little bit about before. That the elephant's really in control. The elephant is acting on habit. The elephant is acting on emotion, and the changes that were being asked were really required rational thought, but they just didn't have the time in that situation to really take a step back and think about, well, what does this situation require of me? Now, is there anything else you want to add here? Because next you'll be going into groups to try and come up with a model for understanding why people resist change in organizations, kind of using these ideas. So this is, if there's any other reason that you think that we've missed, we can pop it onto the whiteboard now. Otherwise, I will, so Frank has said the endpoint is not clear. Right, so I think, exactly. So this comes back to Dodge never gave the why. There was no point where Dodge said, we're in a blow up, we could die. You know, everything was implied. And again, I'm not trying to blame Dodge. He's in a very difficult situation, but right, there's no kind of vision, there's no goals set out for them. I think that's really important too. Okay, so now we are going to go into groups. So I want to take a quick screenshot of that so that I can drop it into the chat so you can work with it when you're in your groups. Okay, could I have that? Okay, so now you're going to use what we just discussed in your groups to come up with a model for why people resist change in organizations. So basically what I want you to do is elaborate the rider-elephant path model. So you should think about everything we discussed that is a kind of rational reason for people resisting change, everything that we discussed that might be an emotional reason for resisting change, and everything that might be situational. So we just said the endpoint wasn't clear. So in your model, in the path, you might say people resist change when there's no clear vision, there's no clear goal. people for the writer, you might say people need to understand the change, or people need to understand what is required of them. So is your task clear? Do you have any questions on what you're doing? Good. So we will take, let's take 15 minutes in our groups to come up with this model, and pop it into a PowerPoint slide. So rider, elephant, path. And then I'm going to ask probably one, maybe two groups to share their model with the whole group when they get back. So make sure you prepare your PowerPoint slide, have something to share in case I call on you. So I will drop, as I said, I will drop that into the chat, what we just came up with as a group. So while I drop that into the chat, can we get ready to pop everyone in groups?
Yes, I'm ready.
Let me just pop this in the chat. We can drop things in the chat when they're in the groups, can't we?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Technically, whether it's a picture or it's text.
Yeah.
So let's figure that out. I'll open groups, and yeah, 15 minutes as Raina allocated. Open groups now.
Hello.
Hello. Let's see.
You're in mute, Christine. Also, Cecile.
Okay, Casper, should I email this to you? Or
let me just see. Let me
maybe co-host
people here. I know John is sending attending something unique here.
Yeah, thanks, Casper. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, just talking. No problem. Pleasure. Let me just allocate Philippe and Victor here. Okay. To jump out. I think they're okay. They're allocated. They're just not putting themselves. So good. Yeah. So Raina, please go ahead. Is it a picture file you have?
Yeah, it's just a PDF.
It's a PDF or
PDF.
Okay, try and send it to me. Let me see what I can do. I think we have kind of text we can send into the chat. I don't think we can send in a picture to the best of my knowledge. Try and send it to me. I'll see what I can do. Yeah.
I can also, I can just, yeah.
I don't think we can, yeah. Let's just see what, let me just pause recording.
And the path, and in the path, looking at the path or let's say circumstances, we said the situation changed fast, so it was not stable. Lack of training, but also the severity of the situation was kind of
hidden.
Yeah, under-assessed or not visible well enough. So then you have a situation that changed fast, but it's also much more dangerous than you thought.
Excellent. Yeah, that's an excellent analysis. Yeah, I know why you're grappling with where you put stuck in scenario one. I tend to agree with you. Probably it does initially go as the writer. The writer really has to understand what is the kind of the rationale for what you're asking me to do. But I understand that you're probably thinking, well, the elephant kind of has to feel it. And that's exactly the right way to think. Ultimately, you want rider, elephant, and path all to be aligned with one another. So I really like this model. Holding on to the past, proven solutions, where I'm going to give you an opportunity to discuss that in the relation to your own context in just a couple of minutes. So thank you for sharing this fantastic model. Can I ask another group to share their model?
Is it now? Now it's stopped shared. Okay.
Thank you.
We can share ours.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So do you see it now?
Yeah, fantastic.
So I think we just more or less brainstormed these 5 sentences, and I guess the initial one, if rational is not properly explained, then the writer will not agree. Of course, that's the writer. And then secondly, if the elephant is fearful / excited, he will run in one direction. And I think it might, and the one in one direction might be the wrong direction as well, in this case. And then we spent a lot of time actually on the path. So we came up with this: if the path is not clear, how and where are we moving? And I think that was actually the most difficult one to coin. Let's say of the 3, I think the rider and the elephant was pretty clear for us. We spent a lot of time on putting this into context with the lease plan merger. Yeah, but I think we stuck to the explanation that Jerome also gave on the path being the context to some extent. And then again, lack of competences or wrong competences, that would be the rider. And lack of team spirit, collaboration, and trust, that would be the elephant.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's really good. Thank you. Okay. Does anyone else want to share their model before we move on to thinking a little bit about how that model applies to your situation?
Not much to add, but it was interesting discussion in our group that is the trust, whether the people trust on the leader or not. Is that the rider or the elephant? If you're unclear and you are not giving the right directions, or the communication is unclear, and then that becomes the kind of a trust question. Is it the rider, or is it then the feeling that is the elephant that you can't influence?
Yeah, exactly. So it's both, right? The rider can articulate things about the leader, but also you have to feel things about your leader. Which is the most kind of important? Well, if we think about the dual process model, it's definitely the elephant. The elephant really has to trust the leader first. But yes, a lot of these things, as I said, there are elements you need to align. So leaders need to give the why. They also need to inspire trust. They also need to make sure the situation is conducive to change. So you can think about all of these blockages needing to be threaded through elephant, rider, and path. So I'm glad you got to that point in your group discussions. It seems like you really understand the power of this model for understanding why people resist change. So I know that we have been going for a little bit of time now. So, but don't worry, I'm going to now, in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to give you a working break. So don't worry, a break is coming in case you're feeling quite fatigued. So before I set you into your next activity, I want to now kind of move from the case to your situation. So we spent a lot of time thinking about why the smoke jumpers didn't drop their tools. And you came up with a whole bunch of reasons why. I said, well, the tools are symbols of what they do, who they are, and how they work. So we don't drop our tools because they help us fight fires. They don't drop our tools because our tools are precious to us. They're part of who we are. And we don't drop our tools because we've been trained to hold on to our tools. So you know, I broadly would say that the reason why they didn't drop their tools, all those things that we discussed about, is about this kind of symbolic aspect. It's not just about the tools, it's about what the tools mean. And we really take the identity is not something that we think, as this case demonstrates. It's not just in our heads. Identity is who we are, and we express who we are through our physical and our social environments. So I have, maybe we'll just run one poll question here, Casper, and that is about, I'm curious to see who makes their bed in the morning here. So if you could just run that poll, Casper.
Yes, we'll run the poll. Who makes their bed in the morning? Launching now. Yes.
So do you make your bed every single day? Yes or no?
I think we're getting there. So I'll end the poll and share the results.
So we're pretty much split here. And I would expect us to be pretty much split because that's typically what I see. Maybe let's run the next poll as well, which is about carrying a stamp around. So
yeah. Let me see if I
next,
yeah.
Yeah, I can. It looks like I can run it now.
I'm not sure we have that one. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Let's just leave that. Okay.
Yeah.
So I asked this question. It's actually drawn from a pretty famous study where they asked people to go into people's houses, so strangers' houses. So I've never met you before. I go into your house and I go in with a personality inventory, and what they find is that people can respond to this personality inventory pretty accurately for you. So I've never met you before, but just by looking at your house, I can figure out how extroverted you are, how conscientious you are, how open to experience you are. And my answers really correspond with your answers. So making the bed, this is about conscientiousness. So highly conscientious people like structure and order and rules, so they tend to make their beds. More less conscientious people who find structure and order constraining, they often don't make their bed. If you carry a stamp in your wallet, or you have, say, blank birthday cards at home, in case you need to write a birthday card, that's a very similar thing, right? So, you know, are you conscientious? If I see lots of art on the wall, I might be able to figure out that you're quite open to experience, that you like creative things and experiences. And these are all really good demonstrations of the fact that we really craft physical and social environments that allow us to express ourselves. And so in change situations, when we're asked to behave in ways that contradict our sense of self, we often resist. And that's one of the reasons why the smoke jumpers really refuse to drop their tools, because doing so, that's not what we do as firefighters. We fight fires. We hold on to our tools because this is who we are. And so in organizations, what we see is that often resistance to change is identity threat. You're asking people to do something that is against who they feel they are in the organization. And this is particularly true in situations that you're in of a merger and acquisition. So we know, and I'm sure you know, that often M&As don't yield the gains they're expected to just from a business perspective. And that's because this identity side of thing is often mismanaged. So we derive a lot of our sense of self from where we work, and it's really important to people to know, okay, who we are as a company and how you know, who I am as a member of this organization. But mergers impose new identities on individuals. They require that people give up their old identity and take on this new one. So this has a lot of can have a lot of negative effects. And one is it creates uncertainty about how to behave in the organization. So I've got this quote here from a telecom manager after a merge, and he or she says, "I knew the old Bell system, its mission, its operation, its people, its culture. In that knowledge, I had a sense of identity and confidence about my company and myself. Now I work for a new company, I find myself asking, who are we? Who am I? Okay, so you can see that while you're thinking about these questions, who am I? What do I do? That's process loss in organizations. We also know that if the new identity, so the newly merged organization, if that identity is not experienced as sufficiently positive or high status, individuals might resist the merger. So often if you're the dominant group absorbing, say, a less prominent organization, people in your organization can feel like, well, who are we now? Now we're a lower status company. And often when we see two rivals merge, they can retain this us versus them mentality. We're one organization, but actually I still think about you as someone else, my rival, and that can undermine merger gains as well. So thinking about a merger and acquisition through the lens of this kind of identity perspective about in-groups and out-groups and who we are and who we used to be is really important for managing the kind of people side of a merger and acquisition along with the business side. So are there any questions on that before I put you into your working break? Anything you want to discuss about this perspective on mergers and acquisitions? Okay, well, as you start to think about it, I'm certainly happy to talk more. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you as I said, a working break. So take the time to step away, grab a cup of tea, grab a cup of coffee, grab a snack, bio break, and so then reconvene with your groups in 10 minutes, and then take sort of, well, let's say 12 minutes to discuss. No, let's say 15 minutes then after that to discuss these questions. So the questions are, in your current organization, well, what tools are valued? So we just talked about people, companies not dropping their tools. That was in one of the analyses that the groups presented. I think it was Frank's. So what tools are valued in your organization, and what tools will you need to drop as this merger comes up? What identities does the change, the merger and acquisition challenge for you? And what cultural values and beliefs might provoke resistance to change? So I want to really give you an opportunity to take what we just discussed, apply it to your own situation, so you can have some space to get some insight into this identity perspective as it applies to your upcoming merger and acquisition. So I would take a picture with your phone of these questions so that you know what you're discussing in your groups. So let's come back at just before. Let's come back at 5:02, having had your break and your group discussion. So how you allocate the time is up to you, but let's come back at 5:02, ready to discuss. So Casper, if we could put people in their groups.
Great, I'll put you in the groups, and once again, you have until 5:02, suggested 10 minutes by yourselves, and then in your group, you'll be able to join the group from now on. So I'll allocate everybody now. See you at 5:02 in the plenary setting. Should we get them back, Raina? I think we are. I think you're muted. Yeah.
Let's give them another. I'm not. According to my clock, we've got another minute or two.
Okay, perfect. Got it.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, sorry again. I've been
Hey,
ejected from the.
okay, understand. Well, check feed. What group are you? Group 7 or?
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much.
No problem.
I think we can close rooms now.
Okay, we're closing now. You got a few seconds. Okay,
Nice.
I'll close and I have 60 seconds to come back. I'm closing.
Okay.
And I've sent the case study just for your information. So.
Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so everybody's back now. I hope you had a generative discussion. I'm very curious to hear some of the main. Perfect. I'm very curious to hear some of the main points that came up in your group discussion. So no need to be exhaustive. If you would like to put up your hand to share the sort of issues that you spoke about in your group. So Hadrian, what were you discussing?
Yeah, thanks. I will do it quick. Tools we could actually get rid of, and no offense to anyone here, but financial reporting system, identity, ALD looks like a family business, decentralized, with flex working condition. So that's something that we could be afraid of, I would say, losing. And when it comes to cultural values or beliefs, one of the beliefs would be that we are better or they are better. So once you find out that could be, yeah. And also this, I would say, customer centricity. That's one big cultural value in ALD as much as the innovation. So if we again find out that this is not something we can do along the way, that could clearly create some resistance to.
Yeah, great points. So, you know, you're talking about flexible working, and it's really important to keep things like that in mind, because if people are afraid of losing a benefit like that, that's what they're going to be talking about during the day, not their day-to-day work. So it can be an incredible distraction. And you talked a little bit about, did you say, it was before you said the customer centricity thing, it was about something about status or being
better.
Prestige. What was it?
Sorry, no, go ahead.
You were talking about status or prestige?
Yeah, the feeling that we are better, or actually that we will find out that they are better than us at something.
Yeah, and so what we know from the research is when we have that kind of idea in our mind of who's going to be better, the two groups will create differences on really odd, seemingly meaningless dimensions that become very meaningful to them. So there's a famous case of an Australian merger. Two airlines merged, very high status group with a less prestigious airline. And the thing that became the big differentiation was that in the prestigious airline, because they were so big, the pilots either took off or landed. They didn't do both. And in the less prestigious airline, it was the pilots did both. And so the less prestigious airline thought, you know, those pilots couldn't do their job because they couldn't do both. And the more prestigious airline thought, well, that's silly that they're doing both, you know. So there's a really silly thing. Pilots can do both. You know, that's where the status hierarchies and the differentiation can emerge. So you do have to be quite careful of those identities that are at play. So I'm glad you had that discussion. Thank you, Hadrian, for sharing. Can I have another group share sort of the highlights from their group discussion?
Maybe I can go.
Thank you, Julian. Yes.
Matthew.
Oh, Matthew, sorry. Julian's hand is up too.
Yeah, because Julian is raising the hand.
Matthew, yeah.
Next, Julian, wait a bit. So on the tools, we were speaking about the office location because we may have to change, and it's a tool somehow, and it's going to be tough to readapt to this. We were also discussing, I don't know if it's identities or tools, but two things. One is the name of the company, which is somehow a tool in a way, and also part of our identity. There was a mix also between identity and tools about empowered by design, because that's our cultural identity, but it's also a tool for us to manage the day-to-day business.
Right.
And one point which was raised about what could lead to resistance to change is the perspective for everyone, because it's a lot of effort now for something or benefits which we will see later. So we are on a larger scale of time, and that could be a problem for everyone to position ourselves.
Yeah, needing to keep that energy and motivation and fire alive on such a long time scale, that's tough in any change effort, definitely. Again, office space, location, layout, all of these things which feel like potentially side issues to the merger, really important to think about, because they're important to the people who work in your organization. They can change commutes, they can change prestige if suddenly I don't have a corner office anymore. All of these things are really important to people, so that's good that you're thinking about them. And finally, we'll hear from Julian.
So our focus was a bit about our tools as CEO, as a group, a particular group. So one of the tools that we actually might lose is our own network, because our capacity to mobilize resources across the organization is a key success factor in our capacity to deliver projects. So, and of course, this comes because most of us have a long trajectory, and a lot of unknown, unwritten codes, and we know the stuff, we know the history of projects, and and we have also our own, I would say, trust capital and credentials that help us carry through some projects. And of course, if you shuffle all the organization around, you have to rebuild all of this. And I think it's something that it's, I would say, at least challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that you reflected on the question in that way, because that's a really important understanding that it's not just about other people, it's also about your own idiosyncratic reactions and how your reactions might be holding you back, making you hold on to tools that perhaps you need to drop. So I think I'm glad that you took that discussion in that direction, because part of this is understanding, if in this particular case where the smoke jump is holding on to our tools, even though it's irrational to do so. Good. So before we move on to our next section, are there any questions that you want to ask? Anything that you want clarification on? Okay. Oh, yep. We have one question. Suvajit.
Yes, I had actually posted this question before the break, and
I see.
One of the interesting things is that in a merger you find resistance, but when a guy leaves a job and joins a new job, easily adapts to the environment there. Why is it so?
Well, because they're choosing the change in that case, right? In that case, in the case of a merger, the change is being imposed. So you might be perfectly happy with your situation, but somebody comes along and says, well, actually, now you're part of this new organization that you didn't necessarily sign up for. So it's about the personal choice. And that is why if you can create situations where people have the feeling that they're choosing or opting into a change, your change will be much more sticky, much more likely to hold, because personal choice is so important to human beings. Any other questions? Okay, well, let's move on in that case. You obviously jump in at any point if you do have questions. So now that we have used that model of rider-elephant path to understand change and why people resist change, I now want to talk you through some evidence-based solutions for inspiring change. So this is the only component of our masterclass that is kind of pure, kind of more traditional lecture content. We'll spend our final hour or so together on a case, which will be a lot of you discussing in small groups and coming back. So very interactive to finish off. So evidence-based strategies for inspiring change. So when I go into organizations, typically the approach leaders take to change management is what I call analyze, think, change. And this is really the business case for change. You present some sort of analysis, some sort of summary, you present your hockey stick model, you're using facts and figures, data and analysis to convince people that your change is necessary and important. But this analyze, think, change approach, this is what I call a necessary but not sufficient condition. And in fact, if your change is the kind that provokes identity resistance, the kind of identity resistance we've just been talking about, this will definitely fail. So why is that? Well, there's a lot of evidence that when our identities are threatened in some way, so our sense of self, our sense of values, we respond with very biased information processing. So let me give you an example. This was about capital punishment. They brought people into a lab who had mixed views on capital punishment. So some people supported it, some people didn't. And they gave everybody in that study a folder of evidence, and the evidence was mixed. So some of the evidence said that capital punishment was good, it helped deter crime. And some of it said, well, actually, capital punishment doesn't work and it's really expensive. So what they found is that everybody left the study more convinced of their starting position. So if you were against capital punishment, you read this evidence that's quite mixed, and you walk away being more sure that you don't support capital punishment. And the same was true for the people who did support it. So what do you think is happening there? I give you evidence that is mixed, yet you leave more sure of your starting view. What do you think is happening?
I would say that you believe what you've already, your preconceived notions. So that just, you know, whereas the bits that don't agree with your preconceived ideas, you ignore, you discount them.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. So we cherry pick the information, we believe what supports us, and we discount what we don't. So we treat the information differently depending on whether or not it supports our view. So if that information threatens our view, threatens our values, our sense of self, we ask ourselves, must I believe this information? But if the evidence supports our point of view, we apply a much looser standard to it. We say, well, can I believe this information? So we scrutinize that doesn't support our information, our ideas. We find reasons to discount it. We don't scrutinize information that supports our views. And this means that the business case of change is often ineffective, because if you're presenting a business case that in some ways is challenging people's core beliefs, assumptions, and identities, they're going to find ways to reject it. They will pull apart your data and they'll dismiss it. So if not the business case, what is the alternative? And the alternative is what I call see, feel, change. And see, feel, change means you're creating the emotional case for change. So you're giving people experiences, you're working through their identities, you're helping them find their purpose. So this is, these kind of change interventions are a little bit different. They're not typically what you would learn in business school, but there's certainly fantastic evidence for how you can design them and how they can be effective, which of course I'm going to share with you now. So I'm going to share with you just some examples, but these are just examples. In designing your own interventions, you can be as creative as you want. So don't be bound by my examples. Excuse me. So I'm going to talk to you about engaging people's possible selves, connecting them to their purpose, and speaking to their values. I seem to be stuck on one slide here. Okay. So let's talk about that first one, which is engaging people's possible selves. So we've talked about identity, and identity is who we think we are. But of course, identity is not just who we are right now, it's who we were in the past, and it's who we will be in the future. So we have this idea of who we could possibly be. But what's interesting is when we're thinking about who we could possibly be, our thoughts are almost always positive. We tend to forecast in the future. And when we do so, we think about ourselves in really positive terms. So just an example, this is from a study. They found that almost everyone in their study thought it was possible for them to be rich, admired, successful, secure. But almost nobody thought it was possible that they would become a welfare recipient, a spouse or a child abuser, a janitor or a prison guard. So it captures this idea that when we're thinking about who we will become, we think about ourselves in very positive terms. So what that means is, you know, when we're thinking about what sort of CEO we might be, we think we might be like the founder here of Spanx, who is a billionaire, and not like, of course, the disgraced founder of Theranos, who is now facing jail. So how can we use this to motivate change? Well, our possible selves really provide us with an incentive for future behavior. So when we think we want to become this excellent version of ourselves, it motivates us to engage in behaviors that bring us closer to that possible self. And when we think about that we don't want to become this negative version, it deters us from engaging in behaviors that might take us towards that negative version. So what that means, if you make behavior relevant to people's possible selves, you can provide the inspiration they need to change. So this probably feels quite amorphous, so let me share with you an example of how this has been done. So this study was conducted about voter turnout. So we know in the United States, people approve of voting, but voter turnout is pretty mediocre. It's only around 60%. So in this study, they sent a survey out to an electorate, and they looked at who turned up at the ballots the next day. And they sent everybody a survey, and the manipulation was embedded in just one question. So let me show you the two conditions here. So half the people saw this question: how important is it to you to vote in tomorrow's election? And half the participants saw this question: how important is it to you to be a voter in tomorrow's election? So which one of those do you think motivated higher voter turnout? You can just respond in the chat, vote or to be a voter. Right, so you're all saying the second one. So your intuition is spot on. How important is it to you to be a voter? So your intuition is absolutely correct there. So you can see that those who received the noun wording, to be a voter, were much more likely to actually turn out at the polls. And you can see it really motivated very high voter turnout. And the reason for that is because the difference in language, which is quite subtle, to vote or to be a voter, changes the decision about whether or not to engage in a particular behavior into one about whether or not to be a particular type of person. And this is quite a robust effect, actually. We've seen that it deters cheating and unethical behavior if that behavior is framed being a cheater. It increases helping behavior in children. So will you be a helper? And it even increases professional networking. People hate doing professional networking, but if it's presented as being a networker, people are more likely to do it. So for we have a strong connection to our sense of self and how positive it could be in the future. And if we frame behaviors about decisions to be a particular type of person, it can really be a very powerful motivation. So these interventions tap into our ideal sense of self. So I've just put a little note there, and that is that this is an ephemeral effect, which means it kind of wears off quite quickly. So you have to keep reinforcing it. So close to the time when you want people to engage in this particular behavior, that's when you want to remind them that the decision is about being a particular type of person. Are there any questions before I move on to our next evidence-based? No? Okay, good. Does it work with kids? Yes, it does. Yeah, it does. It works very well with kids, actually. Okay. So my next solution is around connecting people to their purpose. So I have a little poll question here. Let me see if I can bring it up. Right. So my question is this. Some people wander aimlessly through life, but I am not one of them. So you can agree or disagree with that. Okay. Votes are starting to come through. Okay, so some of you aren't sure. So let me end the poll there. So most of you agree with that question. Good news, if you agree with that question, you're much less likely to die. So this is based on a study. There are more questions that you can answer in this particular study, but I've just taken one. And that one is some people wander aimlessly through life, but I'm not one of them. And so what they found is that people who tend to agree with this question are much less likely to die. And that is true regardless of age. That is true regardless of where they live and whether or not they're working. And it's also true regardless of sort of health, how you die. Basically, this protects you from dying. So just responding in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. Why do you think that is? How do you make sense of that? That this predicts whether or not you're going to die in the next 14 years. Any ideas? David's no. So Tim, you've said you have a reason to live. Yeah, that's exactly it. This is about our purpose. And do you feel like you have a purpose? So having a purpose protects you. And so I can see Frankie says having a goal, you're more alert to achieving the goal. Yeah, having a purpose, having a goal, exactly. It structures your life choices. And perhaps if you feel like you have a reason to live, you're going to be less risky, you're going to take more care of yourself, and all of those things accumulate to mean that you're less likely to die. So human beings have a very strong connection to purpose and sense of meaning. So what is purpose? Purpose is the meaning and interpretation that we assign to our behaviors when we act. So it basically means what we think we are doing when we are acting. Now, we can think about this in two different ways. And this is called construal theory. So don't worry, I'm going to unpack this. It'll become really clear in a second. So when we are behaving in a certain way, we can put a bunch of different meaning around that. So if we're in a high level of construal, we focus on the big picture and the future. And if we're in a low level of construal, we focus on the details and the here and now. So you can think about this as the kind of psychological distance that you have to what you're doing in the moment and how abstract or concrete it is. So if you exercise, if you go running or you go to the gym, if you're in a high level of construal, you will focus on how that feeling of discomfort and the pain that you might feel is actually getting you fitter and stronger. If you're in a low level of construal, you'll be thinking about the fact that it doesn't feel very good and you just want to go back to bed. Here's an example at the bottom of the slide here about eating a salad. If you're in a high level of construal, you're thinking about how this salad is healthy, it's promoting longevity. If you're in a low level of construal, you'll be thinking about the fact it doesn't taste very good to you and you might want chips and a burger instead. Even in a situation like this, if you're in a high level of construal, you're thinking about how this is helping you grow and develop in a leader. If you're in a low level of construal, you'll be thinking much more in the moment about, is there an email I need to be checking? Here's just another example. So in this, you can see there are two pictures. The big picture is the face. So if you're in a high level of construal, you're much more likely to see the face. If you're in a low level of construal, you'll focus in on the details. And here you can see it's a boy painting a picture of a house. So is this concept of construal, is this clear before we move on?
No, to be honest, I have difficulty understanding. No.
Yeah, who's speaking to me right now?
Jerome.
Okay, and what are you not clear about? Did you said you had a question?
Yeah, I don't know what the word construal really means.
Yeah, so construal, the word means whether or not we're in a big picture or a small picture. So exactly as written on the slide here, it's the psychological distance we have to objects and events. So are we in a big picture, future focused, or a here and now, very detail focused? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So once again, I know that this can feel a bit abstract, so I'm going to give you a really powerful example of how construal can work in the workplace. So let me share something else with you now. Good. She's up there.
University of Michigan for 29 years come this February. My role here is I work for environmental services as custodian too, and I do stripping and waxing, and I actually.
You can all hear this, right? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. Good.
A police housekeeper on 3 floors, and when people call me for requests, I'm there to handle whatever their requests are. If they go to the restroom and they're out of paper towel or toilet paper, they call me to bring in the soap, the toilet paper. If the staff is out of soap at one of the sinks, I'm there to replenish the soap. If there's a spill, I'm there to clean it up. Well, my involvement is basically with the patients. I'm basically a people person, and I try and have a smile on my face every day, no matter what's going on at home or with the department or with coworkers. When the patients see me, they have to see a smile, because you have to understand, when they come here, they're very sick. They don't want to come to an environment where everybody is frowning and pouting and there's fighting amongst each other. So I try and always have a smile, and I'm kind of a jokester. So from time to time, I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing. When I push a cart, I accidentally run into a wall or something. And I actually get a lot of laughs off the patients. And for some reason, they'll always remember me doing that. So the next time they come, they're like, oh, I remember you. You're the one that got your driver's license at Sears. And they'll just laugh and laugh. And so then from that point on, no matter how long they come, they'll always remember that, and they'll start laughing. Because see, my building is the cancer center, and our patients are here to get chemo, and they go to another building to get radiation, and they become really sick with the chemo and the medication. They're here for many hours getting their treatments. So it's really important for me, being that I'm the only housekeeper over here, that they see a positive person and that the environment is clean. And I do extra care on the bathrooms, because this is right now is the cold season. And I make sure that the door handles are sprayed with like Virax and the sinks are clean. And I try and check the bathrooms every hour. So when they come in, the bathroom always smells good. Not too strong, because they're really sensitive to smells, because like I said, this is the cancer center. But basically, that's what I do here.
Okay, so she's the janitor, but what does she see as the purpose of her work? So you can respond in the chat. So how does she think about her work? Putting a smile on the face of a sick person, says Frank. Getting people to think about something else. Yeah. There's a purpose, healing people. Yeah. Give positive experience. Exactly. So you're all getting at the same idea, that even though she is there to clean bathrooms, so we go back to this idea of construal. If we put her in a low level of construal, her job is to clean bathrooms. But in the high level of construal that she's in, you're picking up the same idea, that she feels like she is there to support people, to help heal people, to help cancer patients get better. So here she's in the high level of construal. She sees the big picture of her work, not the low level of construal, which is, I'm just here to clean bathrooms. So hopefully that has made this idea about purpose and being in a high level of construal a bit more concrete. So how can we take this idea that, this powerful idea about having purpose as being quite motivating, and take this and use it? I'm going to share with you just a couple of examples. And here the idea is getting people to think about a concept that I call relational architecture. So relational architecture is just basically, do you have the opportunity to connect with the people who are the core beneficiaries of your work? So for most people, that is central to their purpose, that helping and protecting and assisting the ultimate end user is really important to them and central to their purpose. But a lot of jobs are designed in a way that means that people can't interact with the ultimate beneficiaries or end users of their work. So I put some little statistics in there that this is a really important factor in keeping people motivated and stopping them quitting. And yet most jobs are just set up so that we can't do this at all. But of course, we can change the way jobs are designed to help people connect to their purpose. So one study I want to share with you takes place in a call center. So this is a call center raising funds from university alumni. Like all call centers, this is very repetitive and boring and dejecting work. You get a lot of rejection. There's not a lot of capacity to go off the standardized script. So in this particular study, they divided the callers into two groups. So one group was the control group, and they just had the opportunity to have some training over lunch. The second group was the experimental group. And this group had lunch, and during the lunch, they heard from a scholarship student. So she was an anthropology student, and she talked about all the work she'd been able to do as a result of the funds they'd raised for her scholarship. And they looked at how hearing from this scholarship student affected the performance of these callers. So what you can see is that 1 week before the intervention, they are raising the same amount of money. 1 month after the intervention, the group that hears from the scholarship student is raising a significantly more money every week. So $2,000 more every week. So here, the scholarship student, of course, helped them connect to the purpose of their work. So they tried a different version of this intervention. And I'm curious to hear about your intuition. And in this different intervention, they asked, instead of hearing from the scholarship student directly, the manager told them what happened to the money that they raised. So what do you think will happen here? Do you think that it will be as effective hearing from the manager? Okay, so I've got very quick response here. No. So can you tell us why? Why not?
I think the real example of the person who really benefited, and they see the purpose of their job and how they influence the real example that was proven to them, it's something that really works, and people then they start to evaluate the job that they are doing, even though it's let's be honest, quite boring to sit on a telephone and gather some money. So that's my guess.
Yeah, so your intuition is pretty good, actually. So it's not as effective to hear from the leader. So here you can see the student scholarship message. Hearing from the student yourself is much more powerful. It did actually help. This line is significant. So hearing the leader message does help, but it's nowhere near as powerful as hearing from the person themselves. So exactly as you described, it just dilutes the message. And it comes back to this idea that see-feel change is all about giving people experiences to connect to their inner elephants. It's not so much about giving words or speaking to writers. Any questions on this before we move on? I think it's pretty clear. Good. So a couple of other examples of similar interventions. When radiologists were given photographs of the patients they were diagnosing, they tended to be more accurate in their diagnosis and more empathetic towards the patient. And one of my favorite studies, it was in a fast food restaurant. So again, very boring work for the chefs. And they found that their intervention, which was quite cool, they set up iPads so that the chefs could see the customers and the customers could see the chefs. And when they set up this condition where the customers and the chefs could see each other and interact with each other, the chefs' work improved, their job satisfaction improved, and the customer satisfaction improved as well. So again, helping people to connect to their purpose, and particularly when that purpose is centered on the kind of core, the end user of their work, is really powerful for motivating desired behaviors. Okay, I'm pausing slightly so that you have a chance to ask me a question if you have one. Okay, so the final intervention that I want to share with you is one that's very simple, very quick, very intuitive, and yet we often don't do it. So when we're trying to persuade others, we often speak from our own values. So our arguments are usually framed through the lens of what we care about. But of course, arguments that are reframed to appeal to our audience's values are much more persuasive. And so this is really important to keep in mind in a merger and acquisition situation. Think about what values incoming people might have and how you can frame behavior change to match those values. Just a really brief example. This is taken from politics. And here they were looking at conservative and liberal support for two different issues. So the Affordable Care Act, obviously liberals tend to be pro socialized medicine. So they're always supportive. But when conservatives who are usually against socialized medicine, when the argument for it was framed in terms of purity, so keeping America pure and protecting America from disease, conservative support increased because they're speaking to conservative values. For military spending, which is something conservatives like, so you can see conservatives are always supportive. When arguments were framed for liberals around fairness, so military offers opportunities for lower income individuals to move up, so social mobility, then liberal support for military spending tended to increase. So this is just a really nice example of how speaking through the values or speaking to shared values, speaking to the values of our audience is really important for motivating behavior change. So this, as I said, this is particularly important in a merger and acquisition situation. So finding shared values, hopefully customer centricity is a value that you will all share as one organization. So hooking any of the behaviors you want people to change into these shared values is super important. So any questions, comments and concerns before we move on to our final topic for our masterclass? Good. Okay. So I've left this summary slide in for you around this idea, the section that we've just talked about. And the main takeaway for you is that it should be that the business case for change will often fail. And so you have to make the emotional case for change. But in doing so, you can't tell people, you can't give people identity, you can't give people purpose. You have to create environments and experiences where they can discover this for themselves. Good. So our final topic is managing change in the informal organization. I want to give you 2 minutes now for a bio break. So let's take a really quick 2 minutes to step away, grab a cup of water, or take a bio break. Let's come back in 2 minutes, ready to begin. Casper?
Yes.
Can you try dropping it in the chat, or have you emailed the case to everyone?
Say it again, sorry. So I'm here. You talk, say it again, please. Sorry. Yeah.
Have you emailed the case to everyone?
Yes, it's emailed to everyone. Yeah.
Okay, good. Can you just try dropping it in the chat? I can't seem to, but maybe you can.
Drop the, what do you want? Drop the case? Or?
Yeah, the case, yeah.
So the document? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not sure I can do that.
Okay, that's fine, as long as they can access it through the email.
I think I can copy the text from the document and put it in there.
No. They need the pictures too.
You don't want to do that, do you? No.
No, I just want the document in the chat, but that's fine.
I don't think I can do that. Let me just. No, to the best of my knowledge, I cannot. I can't do that. Sorry. No, I don't think so. No.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's been 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay, so let's begin again. So Casper has emailed you all the case that we'll be working with for the final part of our session. So you should all have access to the case. If you don't, perhaps you can message Casper privately and he can help you out. So our final topic is about managing change in the informal organization. So we've been thinking about the individual level, and here we're going to move up and think about, well, how does that psychology play out in a more group situation? So what do I mean when I say the informal organization? Well, most leaders and managers I talk to think about the formal organization, and that is organizational charts that look like this: who reports to whom. But for me, when I think about an organization, because I spend a lot of time thinking about informal relationships, I think more about organizations in these terms. So here we have just networks of people interacting with each other around common activities. And so this is what I think of when I think of an organization. So we will be talking about in our final part of this masterclass that in these informal elements, these networks of people interacting around collective activities. So everybody in your organization, everybody in this virtual classroom has a social network. So these are your friends, these are your advisors, these are your mentors, these are your sponsors, anybody you go to in the organization, and that particular relationship isn't in the organizational chart. So any informal discretionary relationship that you have, this is what I mean when I'm talking about the informal relationship. I'm talking about informal social networks. And of course, all of the people in your social network, your friends, advisors, mentors, sponsors, etc., they all have their own informal network as well. And so you can think about these informal social networks as connecting everybody in your organization through this ever-expanding web of relationships. So what we are going to spend some time on now is thinking about how these social networks can affect change efforts. And the frame for this is that social networks influence our behavior in regular and predictable ways. And that is true regardless of the organization, the characteristics of the people in the network, the influence of any single individual, and actually the awareness of the people in the network. So what this means, or what I'm trying to say, is that there are rules. Networks have rules, and if you know what the rules are, then you don't need to know anything about the people, the context of the culture. You can make some pretty powerful predictions about how people are going to behave. And so this is really important in a change context, as we'll see. So you should all have access to the case study that we are using in our final discussion. So I'm going to break you in and out of small groups or pairs for this case discussion. So you'll just be chatting for a few minutes, coming back, chatting for a few minutes, coming back. So we'll just go in and out of groups really quickly. So the situation is that you are Steve, you own this company, Silicon Systems, and you've been approached by the National Labour Relations Board, and they are going to hold a vote to unionize your workforce. So you don't want to unionize, but there's a limit on what you can do to undermine this unionization attempt, or you could risk an unfair labour relations suit. So this is in America. We see this is happening to Amazon. They were too explicit in their efforts to undermine the unionization attempts that are happening there. So the vote is getting held again. So that's the situation that you're in. It is described on the first page of the case, just a couple of sentences. So the first question that I have for you is, who are you going to recruit in your effort to undermine this unionization attempt? So you'll see you have three things to look at in this case. You have the formal organizational chart, you have the friendship network, and you have the advice network. So your job in your groups is to pick out one or two names of people that you might recruit in your efforts. And you can, the second question you can think about is whether or not you should focus simply on members of the potential bargaining unit, so they'll be voting. But that's a secondary question. Really what I want you to focus on is, well, who are you going to help recruit in your effort to undermine this unionization attempt? So we're going to make this discussion really brief because it's not particularly complicated. So we'll break into rooms for just, let's say, 4 or 5 minutes, and then come back ready to give me the key names that you've discussed.
Opening the groups.
How many minutes has that been, Casper?
I think we're there now.
Sorry?
1.5.
4.5. Okay, so we can close.
Are you close? Yeah.
Yeah, that's close.
Good. Let's go. That's good.
Being recorded.
Okay, so everybody is back now. So let's put ourselves on mute. Right. So let's hear some of the names that you were discussing in your groups. So you could, so some people are popping them in the chat. So Hadrian, you said Chris, Rick is also a name from Lewis. Okay, Hadrian, why did you say Chris?
Well, short version is, so Chris is part of the potential bargaining unit. So you go straight to the source, and then we try to figure out how to read the advice network combined with the friendship network. So Chris, in the friendship network, has many friends within these bargaining units, and he's also it seems that people are actually also seeking advices, from him. So I don't know. In 5 minutes, that's the best we could come up with.
Yeah. No, I think Chris is a name that comes up a lot.
Okay.
He's well positioned in both networks. So Pekka, you've said Ev or Eve. Tell me about why you picked Ev.
Actually, our group was focusing on all these dimensions we have there, and as Chris obviously has this friendship network, which is pretty powerful,
yeah.
And then Eve over here has a good advice network. And when looking at the actual organization chart, they are in the same business unit, and they can then influence together to high number of people because that is the biggest unit in the organization.
Right. Okay. So you think between Chris and Ev, they've got the friendship and the advice network pretty well covered, and then as well as the bargaining unit itself. Yeah. So Louis, you said Rick. Why Rick?
Yeah, it's maybe a bit more indirect approach. So consciously picking somebody that is not within the potential bargaining unit, but has quite some friendship and advisory connections with them.
And why did you not want to pick someone in the advisory network, in the bargaining unit, I mean?
Because I'm sneaky.
Okay.
No, well, let's say it could help to come over in a more neutral way, to try to have somebody acting that is not being suspected of having a too direct relationship with what is at stake here.
Right. Okay. So you're worried about the kind of politics of it. Yeah. Okay. So I'm seeing another name here, Jerry Sivajit. Why Jerry?
So, okay, whatever I could make out from this, the advisory network, it looks like a lot of people listen to him.
In the advice network. Okay, so you're looking at the advice network. Okay, good. So, the reason why I only give you 5 minutes is because this is a kind of warm-up question. This is not a particularly complicated question, and you all take the approach that I would expect you to take, and that is you're looking for people who are informal leaders. So the names that you brought up were people who had lots of ties in either the advice network or the friendship network or both. So from a social network perspective, this idea about the informal organization, these individuals, people who have many ties, so people who are popular, these are the leaders in organizations. We know that people who are central are very high status, they tend to be very influential, and that is true regardless of their position in the formal hierarchy. So just to give you an example of how powerful this sort of influence can be, one of my collaborators was asked to come in to an organization that was experiencing some really strange things. So they were making redundancies, and in their third round, suddenly the CEO started getting death threats. People were throwing homemade petrol bombs through the factory windows. And my collaborator, one of the bits of data he had access to was the employee referral network. So who had referred people to their jobs. And what he found is that there was one individual, quite low level in the organization, who over the course of 20 years had referred a large number of people in the organization to their job. And so he had amassed this huge network of support. And when he was made redundant, they were all retaliating on his behalf. So that really illustrates this differentiation between being an informal leader and your formal authority. So this person had no formal authority, but was very much seen as a leader in the organization. So what that means is that if you have these people in the center of the network, popular people, you really need their buy-in because they can undermine your initiatives, your change initiatives, even if they don't have much formal authority. And people who are on the edge of the network here, you can pretty much ignore them. Even if they're making a lot of noise, that might feel a bit counterintuitive, but you can pretty much ignore them because they just don't have enough influence to really undermine your change efforts. So my next question is a little bit more complicated. So now, and I would take a picture of this slide before you go into your next discussion so you remember. So here, these are the personal views of some of the members of Silicon Systems. So over Jack and Ev, or Eve, over Jack and Ev, they're very pro-union. Mel and Robin are very anti-union. And so my question is, do you think this unionization attempt will be successful? So I'll give you longer to discuss this, but when you come back, I'll give you a poll so that you get to vote either way. So just take a moment now to take a picture of this slide so you remember their personal views. Okay, so let's now break into the breakout groups. Let's take about 10 minutes for this discussion.
So at 9 minutes, I was mute. Okay.
Sorry.
So at 9 minutes, just for
Okay.
info, it's up to you. Your call.
Yeah, we'll let's give them another minute, then we'll close them.
Good.
Okay, let's close the rooms.
Recorded.
Meeting is being recorded.
Being recorded.
Okay, so we are all back now. Now I'm going to share a poll so that you can share your views if you think this unionization attempt will be successful or not. And before I share the results with you of the poll, I'm going to solicit the views, the views of the groups, and then I'll share the results. Okay, so while you are answering that poll, do you think the unionization attempt will be successful? I'm curious to hear the results of your group discussions. So does anyone want to volunteer to share the view of their group and how you came up with that group, that view?
Okay, shall I start then?
Great.
So let me bring up the case. Sorry, I have to do it by heart because I closed down the case, obviously. But we think that Mel and Robin, I think, they're well connected in the advisory network, but also in the friendship network. And we see that Ev and her other supporters are also comparably well connected in the advisory network, but not as good in the friendship network. So we think that in the end that will make the difference.
Mm-hmm. So you're thinking more about the friendship network than the advice network here, because you're kind of discounting particularly Ev's position, and you're really looking at Rob and Mel and their excellent position in the friendship network.
Because typically there will be a lot more communication between, well, let's say, friendly, connected people than formally advisor needing people.
Right. Yeah. So there's more communication. Maybe the communication is maybe a little bit different in some way as well. So more also means kind of more intimacy, I guess. There's more intimacy in friendship.
Of course.
Okay, so other groups, perhaps a group, I can see that it's pretty even split between yes and no. So the groups that said yes, you think the unionization attempt will be successful. Why is that? What was your thinking? Everyone's too shy. This is the only trouble with the anonymous poll. I don't know the groups that said yes.
Yeah, I would say we didn't even came to a conclusion in the group. So this is more on a, let's say, personal statement. I think in the end they will succeed because it's a new situation within the company. So Eve has a very strong network in advice, not only for the ones that are already pro-union, but also connected to the ones that are, let's say, not pro-union or perhaps just neutral because they never gave it a thought. So I consider this more like it's not really a friendship case, but more, let's say, it impacts my work environment. So I will seek for advice.
Right, exactly. Okay, so your thinking here is if you trust someone's expertise at work, you'll probably trust them on this very work-related situation.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we've heard. So yes, the decision here is which network do you pay attention to, friendship and advice, and we've heard two different views. Does anyone else want to share their thinking, the thinking they had in their group?
Yeah, so maybe just we looked at, again, Mel and Robin's network as looking, that's the biggest. But what we were talking about was that the people you've got to influence are actually the people within the potential bargaining unit, because they're the voters. So it doesn't really matter if you influence Alex, Pat, Steve, Jim, they're not voting. So you need to be, it's not just looking at the network, it's looking at who's in the network, because they have to influence the right people. So they can have a big network, but not have the right people in the network to actually influence the voting pattern.
So
that would take a bit of work to try and track where those lines all go to.
Yeah. Okay, good. So it's definitely often about having the right connections. Any other thinking that you want to share before we do the big reveal?
Maybe I think we also in our group, we also didn't come to a final conclusion. We were more, let's say, this, more the rational, let's say, the organizational chart, because we had, let's say, two of the pro people inside this bargaining box, one just outside the bargaining box, and then, let's say, two against outside. But then I think maybe a little bit contradicting to what Frank said, today you know what you have, but generally, I think you also shared earlier, people, we don't like change. So if to become into a union, that's the change. So people, they will say, why should I vote for a change when I know, because I don't know what I will have. Today I know what I will have. I think we also counted there's more people outside the box than inside the box. And let's say the bosses, the three bosses, they would normally be against. And I think there would also be people would not like change, and people would like to, let's say, to please their boss. So let's say my conclusion would be that they will not succeed.
Okay, so no. Okay, well, it seems like it might be time for the big reveal. So let me share the results of the poll. So I told a little fib when I said it was evenly split. So most of you say no. Most of you think the unionization attempt won't be successful. So let's now take a look at what actually happened. And you are correct. For those of you who said no, you are absolutely correct. And that is, and we said that the key difference to look at here was the friendship versus the advice network. And the key network to look at in this case, and in all cases, is the friendship network. And the reason why it failed is because, oops, I'm sharing, let me get back to where we need to go. Okay. Still think this, sorry, I'm not actually seeing the share on my screen. I'm not sure what's going on here. Let me see if I can quickly fix it. Apologies for this. Okay, let me try reopening it. I seem to be having difficulty sharing my slides.
Okay.
So the key thing that we were looking at here is the friendship versus the advice network. And what you need to look at is the friendship network, as I said. So if we look at the friendship network, what we see is that the people who are very pro-union are all on the edge of the network, and the people who are very anti-union are really in the middle of the network. So it's these people who are very anti-union that really have the capacity to undermine this change initiative. And the key takeaway here is that in times of change and uncertainty, it's really our friends that we turn to. So we look to our friends for support and guidance. So actually, the advice network, this technical network of sharing information and expertise, that's not relevant to us. We care much more about friendship. And of course, that's because we like our friends and we trust our friends. So from an evolutionary perspective, we care much more about how much we like and trust someone than how competent they are. This is a kind of protective threat focus that we have. So this is why we tend to place a strong primacy on our friendships. It's our friendships that really influence us. We know that friendship networks, for that reason, make organizations resistant to change and crisis. So if you have an organization that experiences an external shock, if there is a friendship network that cross-cuts organizational boundaries, what you will see is that that organization will weather the shock more. And that's exactly, we talked a little bit about this when we were sharing our views. It's about the quality and the frequency of the interaction. We like our friends, we trust our friends, we'll go the extra mile for our friends. And part of this friendship is that our friends' attitudes towards change really affect our own. So you've all heard these expressions: a friend of my friend is my friend. My friend's enemy is my enemy. So we've got this comic here. Are you two friends? No, we just hate the same people. So you've all heard these expressions. They're very common expressions. They apply to change as well. So if your friend likes the change, you'll like the change. If your friend hates the change, you'll hate the change. So of course there are exceptions to this. So if you had grown up, in this case, if you had grown up in a pro-union family and the importance of unions was something, one of your core values, that wouldn't be the case. But for most people, what we find is that we really follow our friends' views. So Magdalena, I can see your hand is up.
Yes, I just have a question, because in real life, how do we get access to these networks? Because obviously here it's the case where we have a nice graph. I don't know if we have that knowledge usually and so detailed to be able to utilize it in our decision making and our strategies.
So you don't really need it. And that's, so, the takeaway from this case is something a little bit more general. So obviously you absolutely could map it if you wanted. But human beings are very, very, because we have evolved to survive in groups, we're very attuned to groups and hierarchy. So in terms of the question of who are the informal leaders, we're very good at figuring that out. If you just ask a representative sample of people, say in your business unit or your team, who's really popular, who do people look to? very quickly you'll get the same names. So we're very good at picking out accurately who is popular. So if you want to find opinion leaders, that is how you do it. And for this second point about the importance of friendship, it's really just understanding that you have to work through friendship. So get the opinion leaders in the friendship network. Use them to help lead your change. And understand that it's friendships that people will look to and turn to and be influenced by. So so when you're picking out change champions, we often pick leaders, or we often pick people who have a lot of technical expertise. But the thing to pick is actually popularity. So social capital, who's the most popular and how can they influence the change? So that I've just given you the kind of general takeaway of this case, and that is here we're thinking about that rider-elephant path model at a more general social level, and that is that as we saw for the individual in this kind of group network setting, it's our elephants leading us as well. Our elephants lead us to protect our friendships and to follow our friendships. Much more so than our rider, or in this case the advice network. So are there any questions on that before we move to our close the session with a few reflections? Okay, so we've almost come to the end of our time together. So I just wanted to give you a few minutes. Now, I won't ask you to share with anyone. This is just a few minutes to cement some of the things we've talked about. So just privately write down, what are your, say, 3 to 5 key insights, and what will you do differently now? So I've deliberately kept this masterclasses quite content heavy, because I know Casper will be running you through some more reflections later on about what you're going to do with all of this information. But just to help you kind of crystallize what we've talked about, I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes now to think through, write down what your key insights are. Okay, so we're just about at time now. So as you finish up, again, you take this opportunity now to ask any questions that you might have, anything you want clarification on. And if not, I'll hand back to Casper, but simply to say thank you for your time. It's a long masterclass, so thank you for your time and your engagement, and of course, thank you for your patience as we weathered a few technological difficulties this time. So thank you, and good luck with the merger. I hope it will be very successful for you.
Thank you, Raina. Thanks a lot for taking us through this very interactive afternoon. Just looking ahead, as Raina was lining up, we as usual are doing workshops on these issues on the 2nd and the 3rd of June in your 1 hour time slot there. And we are indeed gonna continue to discuss the merger. As usual, we'll frame some questions very closely linked to what Raina has been doing for reflections in advance in your local management teams, and we'll pick them up there on the 2nd and the 3rd. Otherwise, just don't forget, we also have a session on the 30th of June. This is the last session in this round here of masterclasses, is also in your calendar. But once again, thanks to all of you for engagement, and great thanks to Raina for taking us to this very energetic afternoon. So have a great evening, everyone, or a great afternoon, depending where you are in around the world. Thank you.